you for joining Jennifer Schaus and Associates in our 2019 Webinar Wednesday series. We are coming to you live from downtown Washington, D.C. Our webinars are every Wednesday, and you can find the upcoming schedule on our website. Past webinars and all recordings are on our website and on our YouTube channel, along with over 160 other recordings on federal contracting topics. All are complimentary. If you have questions for our speaker today, you can email her with the contact information you see on the last slide. Right, just a little bit about us. We are a Washington, D.C. based firm and provide services for federal contractors. This ranges from market analysis reports to proposal writing and post-award compliance. More information is on our website, so please visit us. We also have an upcoming event in August, so please see our website for more information or the link on your screen. And we also offer advertising in our newsletter and webinars, so contact me if you want more information. And our webinar today is sponsored by AccuTrack, so here's a short message from them.
AccuTrack Consulting and Accounting Services is an 8A WOSB CPA firm committed to supporting entities to sustain growth in government contracting. Our outstanding DCAA accounting solutions reduce audit risk, improve cash flows, and give you peace of mind. Contact us today to learn how we can enhance your DCAA accounting efforts.
All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Today, our speaker is Mary Beth Bosco from Holland & Knight. Thank you for joining us today. We are going to be covering the NDAA 2019 focused on bid protest, OCA, and commercial contracting changes. I'm going to go ahead and hand over to you, Mary Beth.
Thank you, Mallory. Can we get the first slide? The National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA, briefly is the blueprint for DoD activities in fiscal year 2019. This year, it was passed relatively early. Money was appropriated, and that is why the Department of Defense was not shut down during the government shutdown at the beginning of the year. The NDAA is important because it very often portends what's to come. While it ostensibly only covers DoD contractors, the items that are in the DoD NDAA very often get expanded to the civilian agencies as well. And it is also a vehicle for understanding what the intent of Congress is, and what programs or contracts or other issues that Congress has its sights on. So in this portion of the webinar, we're going to be talking about bid protests, commercial item contracting, supply chain, and other transactional authority, or OTA. The next slide. As many of you may know, Congress has become increasingly concerned and focused on the bid protest process and its impact on procurement. If you talk to acquisition officials within the agency, various agencies, particularly DoD, they now actually build in a few months for GAO or Court of Federal Claims protest in their acquisition schedules. So there's an award date, and then there's a protest period, and then there's a start date. And Congress does not think that is a good thing. The focus this year is the double bite at the apple protest. That is where a company files a bid protest at GAO, loses at GAO, and then brings the protest to the Court of Federal Claims. In the NDAA, Congress is requiring DoD to prepare a report analyzing these double protests. Congress wants the report to include items like success rates, whether the protester was an incumbent or not, how does it impact procurement, planning, costs, etc. One thing that may surprise DoD is that very often after somebody loses a GAO, they will win at the Court of Federal Claims. That is because typically those are cases where the client feels very strongly that the case is meritorious and will therefore want to take it to the Court of Federal Claims. The case has already been developed. Defenses have already been argued, and so it is sort of a more informed protest before the Court of Federal Claims or COFC. Another reason perhaps for a higher success rate at COFC is that when you file a bid protest at the Court of Federal Claims, there will be a Department of Justice attorney assigned to the protest, and that attorney will be working with the agency counsel and the agency procurement officials. The DOJ attorney will have much less in personal investment in the procurement. In other words, they tend to be a little bit more objective, and therefore you might even see settlements once a case goes to COFC. So we'll see where that goes. It is also worth talking a little bit about the Section 809 panel, because the NDAA dovetails with some of their recommendations. For those of you who don't know, Section 809 was Section 809 of a prior NDAA, and Congress convened a panel of experts to make recommendations about improving the efficiency of the acquisition process in general. This panel has been issuing reports, and in its last report, it took aim at bid protests. For example, it recommends that DoD prohibits these double dip protests. In other words, if you lose a GAO, you've lost and you can't go to the Court of Federal Claims. It also recommends that the Department of Defense have its own bid protest function. In other words, it would be in addition to GAO or the Court of Federal Claims. Now, the pilot program is that the NDAA requires DoD to develop a plan for this and a schedule to implement it for contracts with smaller value contracts that are less than $100,000. And then we'll see where it goes from there. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember, but I think it was back in the 1990s, Congress tried this with the General Services Board of Contract Appeals, making that board the only forum that had jurisdiction over bid protests that involved telecommunications or other IT services contracts. So it was supposed to become, and it did become, a body that was expert and had a better understanding of technology contracts. It's interesting that it had a very high success rate for protesters, much higher than GAO, and therefore Congress shut it down after several years. So we'll see how this plan evolves. Next slide, please. Can we have the next slide, Mallory? The second topic is commercial items. So as you probably know, when the government deems a procurement a quote commercial item procurement, there is a smaller subset of regulations and clauses that go into a commercial item contract. And the contractor is exempt from certain accounting or other requirements than it otherwise would be required to comply with. The 2019 NDAA actually expands the universe of these contracts. It first divides commercial items into both commercial products and commercial services. It also allows companies, contractors, to count their sales to state and local governments as a commercial sale. These changes will go into effect as of January 1st next year. Next slide. I have quoted the language from the NDAA because some of it is, represents substantial changes. This first slide, where it talks about a product that is customarily used by the general public, that has been sold, leased, licensed, or offered for sale to the general public, qualifies as a commercial product. That's from the old definition. Next slide. The NDAA expands the definition to include products that have evolved from the commercial products described in the first part of the new regulation or new law. It also allows contractors to count as commercial products something that is not available in the commercial marketplace, but is expected to become available in time for the procurement that's at issue. It also allows minor modifications to be made to commercial items and still count as a commercial item, even if the modification was made to meet federal government requirements. Next slide, please. The third expansion is that a commercial item can be a non-developmental item if the product was developed exclusively at private expense and that has been sold to non-federal government agencies. That's I think a very big change, and probably will allow certain items such as protective vests or other items typically sold to state and local agencies to expand the definition of commercial items. Next slide. I don't need to go through what commercial services are line by line, but the NDAA certainly gives examples of what a commercial service would be: installation services, maintenance services, repair, training, or other services that are in support of a commercial product, servicing laptops, for example, or again, services that are sold to the general public under terms and conditions similar to those offered to the federal government. Next slide. Next slide, please, Mallory. And that the services have to have established catalog or market prices. The government terms have to be similar to standard commercial terms and conditions, etc. Next slide. The other expansion in the NDAA for commercial items is that back in 2017, the NDAA said that the Department of Defense had to go back to all clauses and provisions that were promulgated after January 2015 and examine each one to see whether it was appropriate or not to exempt commercial items or services from the coverage of the clause and the provision. The DoD has been working hard at getting this done. They had sent out, I think, a proposed list earlier in 2018, but the 2019 NDAA surprises them by moving the review time back to October of 1994. So now DoD is going to have to look at every clause promulgated after 1994 to see whether or not it should exempt commercial items or services from the coverage. So, this should greatly expand the exemptions for commercial items, commercial services, but I think it's going to take a very long time to get there. Next slide, please. We hear a lot of talk about other transaction agreements or OTAs. They're kind of, it seems like all the cool kids are using OTAs. You hear about them all the time. And the NDAA has been a vehicle to foster and promote the use of NDAAs. So, for example, in 2018, Congress expressed a desire to increase the use of OTAs for science and technology and prototypes. It also allowed follow-on production contracts could be awarded to a consortia of industry, academic institutions. In other words, there may be an OTA that was development or prototype, and even if the consortium was not involved in the prior contract, it can be awarded the production contract. These days, I would say a large majority of OTAs are being awarded to these consortium because in many cases the consortium actually does a lot of the procurement related administration, and it takes a burden off the agencies. So I would assume we'll see a lot more of that. And then again, the NDAA asks DoD to collect and analyze data and produce a report on the use of NDAAs with the stated purpose of trying to increase their use, increase their effectiveness as well. It also, in this NDAA, it allows the Department of Defense to proceed on a production OTA, even if the prototype project has not been completed. So it will allow a lot more flexibility for the department to get into the production phase. Next slide, please. The last slide I want to leave you with is supply chain. As many of you know who do business with the Department of Defense, DoD has been focused on the security of the supply chain for a while. DoD has its own set of regulations to ward against counterfeit parts, electronic parts. That's been in effect for several years now. You have seen probably the publicity about Huawei and Kaspersky, and this is taking things a little bit further. The NDAA requires DoD to develop a process to limit foreign access to technology. In other words, sort of code for a process for being able to prohibit the purchase by the government of either foreign products or even domestic products, it could be, that contain a foreign component of a company which DoD, suspects as being a security risk. This provision dovetails with the Secure Act, which was signed into law at the end of 2018. that law requires the creation of a Federal Acquisition Security Council, I think chaired by DHS, that's supposed to set policy and standards to address this type of supply chain risk. The council has the ability to make recommendations to exclude sources from participating in federal procurements across the board. There's a process set forth in the Secure Act and a timetable for getting the council together and publishing its rules and processes. This is something that could turn into almost a parallel debarment and suspension process, and we don't know what type of appeal process will really be part of this process once it gets underway. We also don't know how broad it could be. For example, could the agency, an agency or DoD, prohibit a company from doing business with the federal government if it uses a foreign-made part from an entity the government suspects of being a security risk, but that part is not actually delivered to the government? So these are all the questions that we will certainly be, tracking, because this is, again, a process that has the potential to impact a lot of companies, even if they are not foreign, even if they are not foreign owned. If you are using a foreign part in your manufacturing process, you could potentially get swept up into this. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Mallory.
Thank you so much, Mary Beth, for sharing your knowledge and insight today. Today's presentation has been recorded and can be found on our website or YouTube channel within about 48 hours. If you have questions about today's topic, please contact Mary Beth at the phone number or email shown on your screen. Thank you, everybody. This concludes the webinar.